The pro-life movement is a war on women by the patriarchy, or so we are told.
Oh, I think the war on women is real.
The war on women has exploded.
It's an ugly new battlefield in the war on women.
The war on women.
This war on women.
The fight to protect women's right to choose is the most fundamental and patriotic fight that we have right now.
Are we ready to fight against male supremacy in all its forms?
The abortion lobby tries incessantly to claim the mantle of women's rights, empowerment, and equality by portraying childbearing as an obstacle to empowerment. Recently, we've seen abortion advocates latch on to imagery from The Handmaid's Tale, a story that frames our ability to bear children as a means of enslavement by patriarchal forces. But if we look at the actual history instead of fantasy, we see that pro-life, pro-family feminism has been carrying the torch for women's empowerment all along. It is the sexual revolution and the abortion movements, both largely driven by men, that have waged the real war on women. Let's begin our story with the 1950s and early 60s, that period of time which is often criticized as the epitome of women's oppression under a patriarchal system.
I'm not going to let a woman talk to me like this. This meeting is over. Good luck, Miss Megan.
In the 50s and 60s, women did face genuine problems of inequality and oppression, lacking the opportunities that men had to excel educationally and vocationally. In the workplace, it was common to hear of women that were fired simply for being pregnant. In her landmark book called The Feminine Mystique, a feminist named Betty Friedan, who herself had been fired for being pregnant, issued a war cry for equal opportunity for women in every sphere of life. The Feminine Mystique has some serious problems, but here's what I want to point out. Betty Friedan claimed that the reductionist view of women as just housewives was a bad idea, but not a bad idea of traditionalism or Judeo-Christianity, but of atheist Sigmund Freud. Furthermore, Betty never mentioned abortion or contraception as a means to liberate women. She said that creative work would set women free, and that this was always inclusive towards marriage and motherhood, though Betty herself would later admit she did not emphasize the importance of marriage and motherhood as much as she should have. Betty became leader of the National Organization for Women, and her initial stance for women's equality, which excluded abortion, was consistent with the early feminists who came before her. Alice Paul, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and other suffragettes, those heroes of feminism, agreed that abortion was wrong, but they also saw it as a sign of female oppression, often used by men to control and abuse women. Standing against Betty Friedan's women's movement was the sexual revolution, epitomized by Hugh Hefner and his Playboy magazine. Hefner's vision for sexuality was popularized among women by Helen Gurley Brown, who had wanted to work for Hefner until she got the opportunity to transform the homemaker magazine Cosmopolitan into a sex magazine, a Playboy for women. She featured nude centerfolds just like Playboy and an icon of a pussycat after the articles just like the Playboy bunny icon. Helen wrote the book, which became the basis for the modern hit TV show and films Sex and the City. Helen's solution for women was that hard work and lots of unmarried sex without getting pregnant would set them free. This philosophy came to life in the Cosmo Girl, this ideal woman portrayed in Helen's magazine. Only the Cosmo Girls were often complete fabrications. The writers were given a set of rules or guidelines on how to invent their stories and how to make up experts to quote. Then they told these lies to unsuspecting women as if they were gospel. The Cosmo Girl was little more than a money-making scheme, a marketer's and CEO's dream come true. She worked hard, she bought lavishly from pharmaceutical, medical, beauty, fashion, and travel industries, and to top it all off, she did not push for those pricey, bothersome extras like family tax breaks, paternity leave, shorter work weeks, and more flexible work arrangements.
I'm talking about a woman's right to choose.
Through her magazine, month after month, in many subtle ways, Helen sent the message to America's women that motherhood and children were an insurmountable obstacle to their freedom. Betty Friedan called Cosmopolitan quite obscene and quite horrible. Betty opposed treating women merely as sex objects, and she defended motherhood and the family. Betty said, "You want a feminism that includes women who have children and want children, because that's the majority of women." So how did the sexual revolution of Hugh Hefner and Helen Gurley Brown take over the women's movement of Betty Friedan? Answer: 2 more men, white and upper middle class, whose goal was to legalize and mass market abortion all across America. Larry Lader and Bernard Nathanson were abortion advocates who would go on to found the abortion advocacy group NARAL, which still exists today. Lader's goal was the complete repeal of abortion laws as a means to controlling population growth and upsetting sexual morality. He was the biographer and good friend of Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. But Lader's ideas on abortion were so radical, even for Sanger, that it fractured their relationship. It wasn't until another man, Alan Guttmacher, took over Planned Parenthood that the organization began publicly advocating the mass legalization of abortion. Abortion was mainly an upper middle class white man's practice, and Lader worked hard to push it on the feminists, knowing they could promote it even better than he could, if only they'd buy in. In Aborting America, Bernard Nathanson records what Lader said to him at their NARAL meetings. If we're going to move abortion out of the books and into the streets, we're going to have to recruit the feminists. Friedan has got to put her troops into this thing. Well, she still has control of them. We've got to keep the women out front, and some black women especially. Why are they so damn slow to see the importance of this whole movement to themselves? Just as Helen told lies to sell the Cosmo Girl, Lader and Nathanson told lies to sell abortion. As Nathanson would later confess, we sensationalized the effects of illegal abortions and fabricated polls which indicated that 85% of the public favored unrestricted abortion when we knew it was only 5%. When we spoke of deaths due to illegal abortion, it was always 5,000 to 10,000 a year. I confess that I knew the figures were totally false. But these lies were so effective that Lader was able to win over many people, including Betty Friedan. On November 18, 1967, in the Chinese room of the Mayflower Hotel in D.C., Betty insisted that abortion be inserted into the National Organization for Women's platform. Abortion was adopted by the votes of 57 people, after which a third of the women at the conference resigned from the National Organization for Women. Larry's lies and propaganda even made their way into the infamous Roe v. Wade decision, with his book Abortion being cited no less than 7 times in the court's opinion. After abortion on demand was legalized, the rates of abortion and divorce skyrocketed, while birth rates dropped and marriage rates plummeted. Today, Americans commit about 1 million abortions per year. That's 2,700 preborn children killed every day, and more than a third of abortions are committed by Planned Parenthood. Seeing trends like these even back in 1981, Betty Friedan wrote a follow-up book called The Second Stage, expressing her regrets that the feminist movement had demonized the family. Bernard Nathanson left his position at NARAL, converted to Catholicism, and became a pro-life activist, producing one of the most important anti-abortion films of all time, The Silent Scream.
There is no question this child senses the most mortal danger imaginable.
But let's think back to the beginning of our story, to one of the moments that first stirred the fire in the soul of Betty Friedan when she was fired for being pregnant. To say that abortion was a solution to her pregnancy is, in essence, to agree with her boss. It is to say that her pregnant self is the problem, that her natural ability as a woman is the problem, and that her child is the problem. Abortion has done nothing to correct the oppression and inequality that women in these situations face. It perpetuates it. Abortion is an excuse for men, businesses, and communities to neglect, exploit, and discriminate against women. Rather than support the mother and her child, they forcibly divide the two, pressuring the mother to have her child killed. Abortion is the ultimate manifestation of the oppression of women, and women and children cannot be liberated in society until abortion is unthinkable. Telling women they must have the ability to take the lives of their children in order to achieve fulfillment is not empowering. True feminism seeks to promote all aspects of who a woman is, in her education, in her vocation, in her marriage, and in her motherhood. For it is that commitment to a holistic view of women and children in all of their personhood that will truly set us free. For more on the story of how the sexual revolution hijacked the women's movement, see the book Subverted by Sue Ellen Browder.
What are your thoughts about abortion?
We usually don't have to agree with everybody, but we can come to a compromise. Because I was just listening to the radio on my way, and someone was saying like the middle ground is missing. Like you either far left or you either far right. So nobody want to come in the middle and take some of the left and some of the right, which make everybody feel okay, because everybody will have a piece of something that you want. So for me, even when I'm against it, I think the people who want to do it have the right. They should be given the right to do it. They should let them make their own choices and decisions, even when you are far right, even when you're family pro, whatever you want to call it. I don't think you should impose restrictions over others just because you think it's not right. I have nothing against it, and I think it's a right and a choice for people to exercise it. I don't think being pro-life necessarily mean that people can't say that, okay, they don't want to be responsible when it comes to a child, or they don't want to have a child. Being a pro-life doesn't mean that I have to have something against them. No, if they feel like taking the back control and control when to have the baby and how to have it, I think they should have that respect.
And one word, your thoughts on what you saw?
Yes. One word. I don't think we should turn babies apart. I disagree that you should rip the human being apart. It's like you just don't like a little dog, I'll just rip the dog apart because I don't like the dog. And nobody does that because you will get charged for animal cruelty. I think that lacks the compassion, because everybody loves babies. Even when you don't want to have one, you still, think they're adorable, they're innocent, You will never hurt them. Even those who don't want children in this world don't hurt babies.
Would you say that this video changed your mind at all about abortion and your
Absolutely, absolutely. I've never seen it in detail like this. I just know it happens, but I never know this is what they have to do. I cannot do it as a doctor, to be honest with you. I will beg the woman that I will give you all kind of medical attention for you to have the baby safe. But I cannot do such a procedure. After watching this video, honestly speaking, I am against a living being getting sucked out in pieces out of a woman's stomach. I actually cannot take that, to be honest with you. If that's what is abortion, I think we should come up with something different. That cannot be accepted when it comes to me.
And who do you think should watch these videos?
I think everybody, I see especially the young girls growing up. They should watch this. My daughter is 13. I have a 7 and a 13-year-old. I would like my 13-year-old to watch this. So it's a form of like just taking life and just throw it in the trash. That's too much for me. I have children. I can't watch somebody just suck people in pieces and just take them out like that. I've never seen this before. All my YouTube checking and everything, I've never seen such a video. It should, for every little girl should see this. I will show this to my daughter, that this is how they abort children.
My name is Dr. Anthony Levatino. I'm a practicing obstetrician-gynecologist, and I've performed over 1,200 abortions. Today I'm going to describe a second trimester surgical abortion called dilatation and evacuation, or D&E. A D&E is performed between 13 and 24 weeks of pregnancy. After administering anesthesia, the abortionist uses a weighted speculum, like this one, that opens the vagina widely. Because second trimester babies are so large, this greater access facilitates a late-term abortion. Late-term abortion requires that the cervix be prepared 24 to 48 hours in advance with laminaria. Laminaria is a type of sterilized seaweed that absorbs water over 8 to 12 hours and swells to several times its original diameter. Once removed, metal dilators can be used to further open the cervix as needed. Once the cervix has been stretched open, the suction tube is placed inside. A baby at 20 weeks gestation is as big as the length of my hand, from head to rump, not counting the legs. The suction machine is turned on, and pale yellow amniotic fluid surrounding the baby is suctioned out through the catheters. With babies this big, they don't fit through catheters this size. The baby's bones and skull are too strong to be torn apart by suction alone. This is a Sofer clamp. A Sofer clamp is made of stainless steel. It's about 13 inches long. The business end is about 2.5 inches long and a 1/2 inch wide, and there are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. The abortionist uses this clamp to grasp an arm or leg. Once he has a firm grip, the abortionist pulls hard in order to tear the limb from the baby's body. One by one, the rest of the limbs are removed, along with the intestines, the spine, and the heart and lungs. Usually the most difficult part of the procedure is extracting the baby's head, which is about the size of a large plum at 20 weeks. The head is grasped and crushed. The abortionist knows he has crushed the skull when a white substance comes out of the cervix. This was the baby's brains. The abortionist then removes skull pieces. He removes the placenta and any leftover parts of the baby with a curette, scraping the lining of the uterus for any remaining tissue. The abortionist then collects the baby parts and reassembles them to make sure that there are 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the pieces. Once all the parts have been accounted for, the abortion is complete. For the woman, this procedure carries a significant risk of major complications, including perforation or laceration of the uterus or cervix, with possible damage to the bowel, bladder, and other maternal organs. Infection and hemorrhage can also occur, which can even lead to death. Future pregnancies are also at greater risk for loss or premature delivery due to abortion-related trauma and injury to the cervix. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Dr. Anthony Levatino, and in the early part of my career as an OBGYN, I performed over 1,200 abortions. One day, after completing one of those abortions, I looked at the remains of a preborn child whose life I had ended, and all I could see was someone's son or daughter. I came to realize that killing a baby at any stage of pregnancy for any reason is wrong. I want you to know today, no matter where you're at or what you've done, you can change. Make a decision today to protect the preborn. Thank you for your time.
I will no longer do any more abortions. When you finally figure out that killing a baby that big for money is wrong, that it doesn't take you too long to figure out it doesn't matter if the baby is this big or this big or this big or maybe even this big, it's all the same. And I haven't done any since then, and I never will.
My name is Lila Rose, and I'm the president of Live Action. And we're so pleased to have with us today Dr. Anthony Levatino. Dr. Levatino is a board-certified obstetrician-gynecologist from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Dr. Levatino is here with us to share his powerful story of his transformation from a doctor who performed over 1,200 abortions to now a leading pro-life advocate. Dr. Levatino, thank you for being with us.
I'm happy to be here, Lila.
Can you tell me why you first were performing abortions?
I graduated from medical school in 1976 in upstate New York, and if you asked me at the time how I felt about the abortion issue, I wouldn't have hesitated for a minute to tell you that I was pro-choice. This was a choice between a doctor, that female patient, and no one, including the baby's father, really had anything to say about it. You know, some people identify themselves as pro-life or pro-choice, but for so many people it doesn't affect their lives directly. But when you're an obstetrician gynecologist and you say you're pro-choice, it becomes a very personal decision. You have to decide whether you're going to actually do abortions. So along with learning how to do deliveries, hysterectomies, and everything else obstetrician gynecologists do, I learned to do abortions.
So you saw it as a part of your practice?
Absolutely.
During the time of performing abortions, did you ever have any doubts?
The first doubts that I had about doing abortions happened during my residency training. When we were doing first trimester suction D&C abortions, interestingly enough in the delivery room, and when it was my turn to do them, I would do 2, 3, 4 in the morning, never thought anything of it. And we were doing late-term abortions in the form of saline abortions at the time. Technology was different. I met my wife, and we married, and like a lot of young couples, we wanted to have children, and found out very quickly that we had an infertility problem and that she just wasn't getting pregnant. She went to the best infertility specialist in town, and it didn't look like we were going to be able to have children of our own. So after we got over that shock, we decided to adopt a child. Now, anyone who's tried to do that knows how very difficult that is. We went to county agencies, state agencies, religious agencies, anyone we could think of to find a child to adopt and care for as our own. It was during that time that we were trying to adopt a child that I had my first doubts. They were strictly selfish ones, but they were there. I remember literally, I very vividly remember being in the delivery room one day doing a suction D&C abortion and thinking, you know, my gosh, I'm throwing this kid in the garbage, you know, and here I am trying to adopt a baby, yet I'm throwing them away. And I'm smart enough to know it's people like me that makes adoption so difficult in the first place. So the initial doubts that I had were very selfish ones, but they were there.
What did you do when those doubts came and you were searching to overcome the infertility and find a child to adopt? What did you do to kind of put away those doubts when you were performing abortions?
Soldiered on, kept on doing my job, and at the same time tried very hard to find a baby to adopt. We literally started to advertise. I talked to every obstetrician gynecologist in town and people at the hospital and everywhere else and let them know that we were looking for a child to adopt. In August of 1978, I remember very vividly, I was working in the operating room with one of the attending physicians, and the circulating nurse tapped me on the shoulder, and when I turned around, she was holding up a little piece of paper that said, "Call Marcia as soon as you're done." Now, Marcia was the head of social services at the hospital where I was working, and she's one of the people we had talked to. That's all the note said, but I knew what it was. And sure enough, she informed me that there was a 15-year-old girl in labor in the delivery room. She had showed up at a doctor's office for the first time during her pregnancy the day before. Now she was in labor. She wants to give her baby up for adoption. Are you interested? Amazing. She told me over the phone, and I was like, well, of course I'm interested. I remember literally staring at the face of that telephone to call my wife with this news and know that I was just 7 digits away from becoming a father.
Beautiful.
And literally, by the grace of God, we were able to adopt a little girl that we named Heather in August of 1978. And my wife got pregnant the very next month. And we had 2 children. Exactly. We ended up with 2 children, a son and a daughter. They were 10 months apart. Our son Sean was born in July 1979.
Amazing. So can you share more? You've adopted Heather and the events that led to that transformation where you ultimately completely rejected abortion. What was it that really changed your perspective?
I was doing abortions on a regular basis in my practice, and everything was just, you know, the kids are growing and I'm starting to make some money finally, and everything was just wonderful as far as I was concerned until June 23rd of 1984. June 23rd, 1984 was an absolutely beautiful day in Albany. Heather was exactly 2 months away from her 6th birthday. We took the kids to an amusement park that day, came home, we had dinner together, and the kids were playing in the backyard when we had friends arrive for cake and coffee. We were talking with those friends when at 7:25 that night we heard the screech of brakes out in front of our house. The kids had wandered into the road and Heather had been hit by a car. She was a mess. You know, I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to be able to save people's lives. My wife was an intensive care nurse at the time. This is what we did for a living. This was routine to us. But it made absolutely no difference, and she literally died in our arms in the back of an ambulance that night. You know, people who are listening who have children may think they have some idea of what that feels like. I guarantee you, if you haven't been through that yourself, you have no idea what it feels like. I pray you never find out. But what do you do after a disaster? You know, you bury your child and take some time off, and then you try to get back into your life. And I don't remember exactly how long it was after Heather died that I did my first D&E abortion, but I showed up at OR number 9 at Albany Medical Center just like I had over 100 times before. I wasn't thinking of this as anything special. This was routine to me, and I obviously had other things on my mind. And I started that abortion and put in what's called a Sofer clamp and literally ripped out a baby's arm or leg that big, and I just stared at it in the clamp. I got sick. I mean, I literally got sick. But when you start an abortion, you can't stop. When you do a D&E abortion, you have to keep inventory. You have to make sure you get 2 arms and 2 legs and all the pieces. Because if you don't, your patient's going to come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I finished that abortion. I soldiered on and got it done. But I looked I really, for the first time in my career, really looked at that pile of baby parts sitting on a table. And I didn't see all those things that had sustained me all those years. I didn't see what a wonderful doctor I was helping her with her problem, and I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't even see the $800 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And suddenly this was looking really different to me. For the first time in my life, it hit me very powerfully that this woman had come to me, figuratively, not literally, no woman ever literally says this, but figuratively she came to me and said, here's $800, kill my baby. And I was the kind of person that would look right back at her perfectly calmly and say, why sure, I'll do that.
After having that encounter and seeing that child and seeing it as a child, what was the process like to stop advertising for abortion?
Well, I didn't stop right away. I did a couple more, but these were just, I mean, I knew why I felt bad. I will get over this, but I didn't. A change had come that I couldn't take back.
So you tried to do a couple more to see maybe I can get over this, but you couldn't.
Exactly. So I went to my partners and I announced that I would no longer do second trimester D&E abortions. They were just too difficult. And there were just 2 of us in the group that were doing them. So and this dumped the entire load on the other partner. But they knew what was going on. They understood. And I told them I would only do the little ones, the first trimester suction D&C abortions we were doing in the office. And for a couple more months, I soldiered on doing those. But a change, as I said earlier, had come that I couldn't take back. When you finally figure out here, not here, that killing a baby that big for money is wrong, that it doesn't take you too long to figure out it doesn't matter if the baby is this big or this big or this big or maybe even this big, it's all the same. And I'm ashamed to say it, but it was February of 1985, it was that late after Heather's death, that I went to my partners a second time and said, I will no longer do any more abortions. And I haven't done any since then, and I never will.
One of the biggest arguments of pro-abortion activists is that abortion is medically necessary. What's your position on that?
We hear all the time how abortion, including especially late-term abortion, is necessary to save women's lives. Nothing could be further from the truth. I spent 9 years working at a tertiary medical center. I mean, there are only certain hospitals in the country that are designated to take care of the really, really high-risk pregnancies. You don't want to duplicate the effort, it's expensive. So these hospitals get referrals from the surrounding area. And Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, where I worked, was one of them. I was faculty at the hospital for 9 years. And I saw hundreds of cases of really severe pregnancy complications, cancers, heart disease, intractable diabetes out of control, toxemia of pregnancy out of control. And I saved, in those 9 years, I saved hundreds of women from life-threatening pregnancies. And I did that by delivering them, by ending their pregnancy by delivery, either induction of labor or cesarean section.
Delivering the baby.
Delivering the baby. And I always tell people, in all of those years, the number of babies that I was obligated to deliberately kill in the process was 0, none. And I'll give you an example. The key point about late-term abortion that so many people miss is that it takes days to prepare the cervix. This is not a natural situation by any stretch. If you're going to dilate a cervix sufficiently, that starts off essentially as a pinpoint, large enough to dismember or tear apart a baby this big, that cervix has to be dilated, and that can take anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. And especially when you're talking about later term pregnancies. Most life-threatening situations, the vast, vast majority of life-threatening situations in pregnancy are not going to arise until 24, 25, 26 weeks of pregnancy and higher. And when you're talking about that, you're talking about abortion procedures that take 2 and 3 days to prepare the cervix. And I'll give you a classic example. This is a real case. A lady came to the hospital at 27 weeks of pregnancy with severe toxemia. Her blood pressure, you know, a normal blood pressure is about 120 over 80. Her blood pressure was 220 over 160. Okay, this lady would literally be minutes or hours away from a stroke. What do you do in a situation like that? We stabilized her, brought her back, did a cesarean section, had her delivered within an hour of arriving at the hospital. She and her baby did just fine.
Amazing.
Now, let's say we wanted to use abortion to save her life, okay? If with that kind of blood pressure and that kind of problem, if we waited 2 to 3 days to get her cervix prepared, she would never make it. She would have been dead. And that's a perfect example. You never need late-term abortion to save a woman's life. If necessary, you accomplish the delivery. Now, did every one of those children make it because they were preterm? No. But they all had a chance, and most of them did make it.
What you're saying is so amazing, Dr. Levatino, because a lot of people never hear this. They assume when abortion is brought up that it's necessary to kill that child, sometimes to save the mother's life. But you're saying it may be necessary to deliver the baby, but you never have to purposely go and kill that child.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So why is this such a huge argument for pro-abortion advocates to say it's necessary to kill to save the life of the mother?
That argument I don't understand. In my experience over almost a decade, I never had to kill deliberately a single child to save a woman's life during pregnancy. There's a wider discussion, though. Politically, always listen very carefully to the words that are being used. You know, we need to pass law X, Y, and Z because it protects women's health. Bill Clinton, I will be happy to sign a ban on partial birth abortion so long as it includes an exception on women's health. Well, what do they mean? Now, I have a law degree, and every lawyer knows that every single word has meaning. And what Roe didn't do was define the word health. Doe versus Bolton did. It says that health, the term health, includes a woman's physical health. Okay. But it didn't say how badly impaired her physical health had to be for it to be a problem. It includes her mental health. Okay, but again, how bad does her mental health has to be? I suppose I can imagine, I never saw one, but I can imagine a case of if the woman's going to have a psychotic break because of her pregnancy, that certainly seems like a severe mental health problem. How about she's under tremendous stress? How about, I just don't think I can cope with this pregnancy? That's mental health too. It includes her economic health. Whoa, how much money do you have to be economically healthy? Not defined. And if that wasn't enough, it includes her social health. What in blazes does that mean? What it means then when a politician says, I would be happy to support your bill so long as it has a health exception, translation, I would be happy to support your bill so long as it contains an exception so big that the bill is of no real practical effect.
In recent years, RU486 and medical abortions have been really pushed on women. What do you think about RU486?
The short answer to that question is I can't understand why any woman would want to have a medical abortion, and I'll explain why. No matter how abortion-minded she is. There are a lot of problems with RU486. First off, a medical abortion is very distinctly different from a surgical abortion. In a medical abortion, the lady takes pills, takes her RU486 medication, and then follows it up with a second medication, typically one called Cytotec, 24 to 48 hours later. It has a significant percentage of side effects associated with it. That combination is well known to cause cramping, hemorrhaging, nausea, vomiting, and a lot of extremely unpleasant symptoms. The really interesting thing about it, though, is RU486 is FDA approved up to 7 weeks from last period. It is commonly used off-label to 9 weeks. Okay. But even at 7 weeks of gestation, the failure rate was 5% at 7 weeks. As gestation gets further along, the failure rate increases. At 8 weeks, the failure rate is, 8%. At 9 weeks, the failure rate is 10%. Imagine, you're going to go through the trouble of having this abortion. You're going to go through a significant percentage of patients will go through a lot of very unpleasant symptoms, and the abortion won't even work. And then you end up with a surgical suction D&C abortion that you could have had in the first place.
And are there other health problems or along the way as well, as far
Very
as
definitely.
having a failure rate?
There's one huge difference between a surgical and a medical abortion. When you do a surgical abortion, you have tissue, you have baby parts, you have all the contents of the uterus. And if the doctor is doing what the doctor is supposed to do, sends off that tissue to be looked at by a pathologist, who will then confirm whether or not there is pregnancy tissue, products of conception, in that specimen. You do a D&C abortion, you get back a pathology report that says there are products of conception present, you're good. You've done the procedure, you've done it correctly. In a medical abortion, there is no tissue to be examined. That woman essentially pays that money and goes through this procedure to have, basically, to have an induced miscarriage, which can happen at home, in her car, or anywhere else. But there is no tissue to be examined. The key there then becomes, when a surgical abortion is done and no products of conception is seen, it means either the doctor missed the pregnancy entirely, which can happen, not very often, but it can, or more frequently, she has a tubular ectopic pregnancy, and that can be fatal.
Can you explain more the danger for a woman who may have an ectopic pregnancy if she's seeking an RU486 abortion?
You must rule out an ectopic pregnancy. But the only way to rule out an ectopic pregnancy, if you're going to use RU486, is to do an ultrasound. And not everyone prescribing RU486 is getting ultrasounds. There have been deaths associated with RU486, mostly from infections or undiagnosed ectopic pregnancy. Ectopic pregnancy can kill you in no time flat, because a pregnancy was never meant to be in a fallopian tube, and it can only go so far before that tube ruptures, and hemorrhage, sometimes severe hemorrhage, follows.
Another reason or justification pro-abortion advocates use for abortion on demand in America is that it's necessary because of ectopic pregnancies.
That's rubbish. Ectopic pregnancies are life-threatening. Treating an ectopic pregnancy is not doing an abortion. It is saving that woman's life. It's that simple.
While you were practicing as an abortion doctor, while you were performing abortions, did you ever come across pro-lifers, and what was your perspective on pro-lifers?
People always ask that. Now understand, as I tell people, I was not running an abortion clinic. I was running a regular OBGYN office like most women have gone to. We did deliveries, we did hysterectomies. Abortion certainly was a part of our practice. And it was during those 3 years before I stopped doing abortions in that private practice that I arrived at my office one day, and there were picketers surrounding our building, praying, holding their signs. They didn't have our names on the signs, but we knew they were there for us. And people frequently ask me, what are you thinking when we're outside picketing? And I would tell them what we were thinking, what you're thinking when you're in that situation. It gave us a siege mentality. It was us against those kooks outside.
And when you saw folks outside, where did you get the stereotype that they were kooks?
Everybody in the pro-abortion, every abortionist knows that everyone, involved in the pro-life movement is a kook. I mean, CNN tells me so. They would never lie to me.
Do you remember any of exchanges that you had with pro-life advocates?
I remember very vividly an exchange, but it didn't happen quite the way you might imagine. It was during that time when a woman came to me as a new patient. Her name was Susan, didn't even come up to my shoulders. Came in for a routine OBGYN appointment, OBGYN annual exam and a pap smear. Did her exam, and then at the end of the exam, she looked at me and said, "Can I talk to you?" Now, doctors know that many patients, I think especially women, won't really tell you what's on their mind until they've established some level of trust. And so it wasn't all that unusual that she did that. So I sat down in my office and looked at her and professionally looked at her and said, "Ma'am, how can I help you?" And she absolutely blew me away when she said, I've been sent here to give you a message that Jesus loves you. He cares about you. This is not what he had intended for your life, to be an abortionist. Please stop." Now, I had one overwhelming thought when she said that, and that was, I've got to hustle this kook out of my office as fast as I could, and I did. A year later, she showed up for her routine annual exam and pap smear, and when the exam was over, she said, "Can I talk to you?" And I went, "Oh no." Now, understand, it's not like I never darkened the inside of a church before, but people who were really demonstrative about their faith really made me uncomfortable. And she basically said the same message, more or less. I've been sent here to give you a message that Jesus loves you. He cares about you. This is not what he intended for your life, to be an abortionist. Please stop. Now, believe me, I remembered what she had said the year before. But in the intervening year between those 2 visits, I received at least 3 personal greeting cards sent to the office to me, marked confidential, with the message written on the card. One time during that intervening year, I arrived in my office and there was a plate of brownies sitting on my desk with the message tied to the brownies. It's funny, I wouldn't have put a name or a title to what was going on, but Joe Scheidler of the Pro-Life Action League, who's written several books, calls that adopting an abortionist. And that's exactly what this woman did. Now, it's really interesting. It was not till much later that I realized, that I found out, that she was one of the people picketing my office. And I have a message for people, especially for women. Oh, Dr. X does abortions. I would never go to him. Well, you're never going to change somebody's mind you can pick it all you want. You may or may not change somebody's mind that way, but I will suggest to you that most of the time you won't. And you can yell at someone and scream at them, but I can absolutely tell you, you will not convince their mind about anything that way. If you're going to convince somebody that maybe the path they're walking is wrong, you need a relationship with that person of some sort to be able to start that dialogue. This lady was very clever. She became a patient. Believe me, doctors listen to their patients.
It's amazing, and definitely a message to women who are pro-life that maybe that doctor that is performing abortions is one to go talk to.
Exactly.
Dr. Levatino, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What do you think about abortion?
My thoughts on abortion, I feel like it depends on the situation. So say whereas like if somebody was raped and then, that whole situation came about, I think the best way would be to abort. But if it's not, it was just, mutual decision, and you're not ready, I feel like abortion would be the best option just for the sake of the child. You can't have a child and not be stable, because once you have a child, they're your first priority, and it wouldn't be fair to make them suffer because you're not well. So that's what I think about it.
And do you identify as pro-life, pro-choice, or neither?
Pro-choice.
Regarding the age of the pregnancy, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester development, would you restrict it at any point?
No.
No. So all the way up until birth. Do you think after birth?
That's a tough one. I guess I would say after birth.
Even after birth.
It's rough. It's rough, like when I see how babies' parts are. I mean, it's really sad, but I'm just thinking about that whole rape. I think it was something I'll have to dwell on a little bit. I don't want a child out of rape, and I don't want to kill an innocent soul.
We don't even put rapists to death. So to sentence the child to death is in a sense legally giving more rights to rapists than to children. And it's punishing, the child for the crimes of its father.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But no question, if a woman suffers rape, that's a horrible, horrible thing. Does abortion heal what she suffered, or does it actually present an obstacle to her healing?
Well, it doesn't heal. I think it makes the situation worse. Now that I think about it, it does make the situation worse.
Do you think now, watching this and from what you just said, do you still support abortions up to birth, even afterwards?
I don't think I support it, period. Sad. It's just how, just the body parts are just ripped like it's paper, you know?
This investigation of Planned Parenthood is based on false premises, one after another after another. It's time to stop wasting time, get on with meaningful work, and stop picking on women and trying to take their choice away. I yield back the balance of my time.
The time of the gentleman has expired. We welcome our distinguished witnesses today. Do you and each of you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And I'll now begin by introducing today's witnesses. The first witness is Dr. Anthony Levatino. Dr. Levatino is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist. Over the course of his career, Dr. Levatino has practiced obstetrics and gynecology in both private and university settings, including as an associate professor of OB/GYN at the Albany Medical College. And Dr. Levatino, we'll begin with you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to get right to it. Second trimester D&E abortions performed between roughly 14 and 24 weeks of gestation. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Her baby is the length of your hand plus a couple of inches. And she's been feeling her baby kick for the last several weeks, but she's asleep on an operating room table. You walk into that operating room scrubbed and gowned, and after removing laminaria, you introduce a suction catheter into the uterus. This is a 14 French suction catheter. If she were 12 weeks pregnant or less, basically the width of your hand or smaller, you could basically do the entire procedure with this. But babies this big don't fit through catheters this size. After suctioning the amniotic fluid out from around the baby, you introduce an instrument called a Sofer clamp. It's about 13 inches long. It's made of stainless steel. The business end of this clamp is about 2.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. There are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. A D&E procedure is a blind abortion, so picture yourself introducing this and grabbing anything you can blindly and pull, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. Reach in again, pull out an arm about the same length, which you put down on the table next to you, and use this instrument again and again to tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. Head on the baby that size is about the size of a large plum. Can't see it, but you've pretty good idea you've got it if you've got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Then you could pull out skull pieces. And you have a day like I had a lot of times. Sometimes a little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations, you just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose.
One more question, Dr. Levatino. Why did you end your practice of doing abortions?
I did over 1,200 abortions over a 4-year period in private practice, not counting the ones that I did during my training. I met my wife during my first year of training at Albany Medical Center. We got married about a year later and found that we had an infertility problem. After years of failed infertility treatment and several years trying to adopt a child, we were blessed with adopting a little girl that we named Heather in August of 1978. As sometimes happens in those situations, my wife got pregnant the very next month, and we had 2 children 10 months apart. 2 months short of my daughter Heather's 6th birthday, she was killed in an auto accident and literally died in her arms in the back of an ambulance. Anyone who has children might think they have some idea of what that feels like, but unless you've been through it yourself, you have no idea whatsoever. I know people find it hard to believe, but what do you do after disaster? You bury your child and then you go back to your life. And I don't remember exactly how long it was after my daughter died that I showed up at Albany Medical Center OR number 9 to perform my first second trimester D&E abortion. I wasn't thinking of it as anything special. This was routine to me. But I reached in, literally pulled out an arm or leg and got sick. You know, earlier on I described stacking up body parts on the side of the table. It's not to, gross people out, to use a simple term. When you do an abortion, you need to keep inventory. You have to make sure you get 2 arms and 2 legs and all the pieces. If you don't, your patient's going to come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I soldiered on and finished that abortion. And I know it sounds, as I said, hard for people to believe, but I'm telling you straight up my experience. You know, after over 1,200 abortions, first and second trimester up to 24 weeks and all the rest of it, and being very dedicated to it, for the first time in my life, I really looked. I really looked at that pile of body parts on the side of the table. And I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see all the money I just made. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And I stopped doing late-term abortions after that, and several months later stopped doing all abortions.
There's still a question. Thank you.
Everything changed from that moment I found out I was pregnant. Without the Knights of Columbus donating these ultrasounds to the Women's Care Center, I don't think I would have ever have kept my son. Before seeing him, I wanted to either put him up for adoption or I was either gonna have an abortion. I was still in high school. I was so scared. I was so nervous. But when I saw him, my baby on the ultrasound, and I heard his heartbeat, I remember just falling in love with that sound and falling in love with just that tiny little, it was a tiny little peanut. That's when I'm like, I want to keep him. This is my child. So I'm very grateful for getting that opportunity to have and see my son, and just that changed my life completely. And I'm so grateful for that. Thank you, Knights of Columbus.